Welcome to the Future of Learning. I'm Irina Bokas. When it comes to education, there are always questions of educational outcomes and how we measure them. This, of course, determines the perceived performance of our schools and actions taken to improve it. The discussion of educational outcomes also brings up ethical considerations, what matters in education and what an educated person should be. This understanding might vary from culture to culture and from one era to another. What do American schools currently value educationally, and does it serve our children well? Today we have an opportunity to have this conversation with Pasi Sahlberg, a visiting professor of practice of Harvard Graduate School of Education and the author of world-famous book, Finnish Lessons 2.0. Pasi, thank you very much for being here today, for your time.
Thank you, Irina.
As you know, and we do realize that every country and every community is very unique. And yet, as our world is becoming more interconnected, education can no longer be determined by the local needs of communities, but rather it needs to give an individual everything that he or she needs to live and work really anywhere in the world. So you had an opportunity to work with a lot of education systems around the world. So from your perspective, what an educated person in a global context should know and be?
That is indeed a difficult question. There are some of those who think that we should not try to define education through this question or answer to this question, or what are the things that everybody should know or be able to do. And then there are those who say that we should have a kind of almost like a world curriculum or world standards that every single education system and school should do. I think education has always had a kind of a set of generic aims, and I belong to those who think that those almost classical areas of education are still valid. I think it's very important, regardless of where you live, whether you are here in the United States or in Finland or anywhere, the education system is helping every individual to realize what their talent or where their passion is, and then help them to learn and develop and grow with those things. I think any education system anywhere in the world should help young people to be able to live and work and communicate to other people and one another. So there is a kind of a set of generic expectations. Some people may call them a global competencies, but I think we are actually talking about a very kind of a classical expectations of education. We have to remember that when the public education as we know it now was created about 400 years ago in Europe, that the aim of education was exactly the same. It was to help young people to, through education, to be tolerant, to value different cultures, understand different languages, be able to cope and deal with different people. And I think in some ways this circle in the history of education is just getting to another round, that we talk about the same things right now.
All right, when we're looking at the global perspective, a lot of domestic educational policies in many countries, and I believe America is one of them, were influenced by international organizations or institutions, and PISA, or Program for International Student Assessment, is one of them. So they're trying to gauge the academic aptitudes of youth in different countries. And PISA lately been criticized quite a bit for cost in some countries' creativity, perpetuating standardized testing, and so on. And while there are a lot of discussions of why PISA test results don't show much or not very significant, I'm really wondering what do they show, what do they measure, and is there anything that we can actually gain from those big data sets?
Well, absolutely. I think the data and information about global state of education is very important. Without data from different countries, if we cannot compare the US education to other countries, the situation would be very difficult. It would be like it was 20 years ago, that there were many education systems that they thought that they are doing good job, but now when there's more data and information, we know that that's not the case. I think the initial purpose of many of these assessments, not only the OECD PISA study, but many, even the standardized tests in a place like the United States, have been different than it is now. Somehow the use of these instruments runs out of hands and runs out of the control of those who initially designed, for example, PISA to be used as a policy benchmark instrument where the governments or ministers of education could somehow compare and see where they are compared to others. But now, as it happens often with the testing, student testing and assessments, that the rankings and league tables are creating a competition between countries, and when the ministers compete against other countries and other ministers, they sometimes do silly things, like, for example, that they change their education policies so that the PISA scores or test scores would be improved. And then when the ministers are asking their superintendents and principals and teachers to do well in these tests, then we are often seeing things like we have seen now, that there's less emphasis on music and arts and foreign languages and social studies, and because all the resources and time is spent on doing well in the test. And that's why we always have to keep in mind that having the test or measure in the first place can be very different than the use of this measure during the course of the time. I think it was Donald Campbell who created the law, Campbell's law, that says that whenever any social indicator is used for the purposes of measurement, the high-stake purposes, it becomes corrupted. And this is what we are probably going to see in the education measurements as well.
So basically, the purpose was not what is it right now. So not where we took it from the original purpose.
Absolutely, and I haven't seen anywhere that the OECD, for example, would have encouraged media to create these league tables of countries and use the data to blame or shame their own teachers or schools. But this is something that whenever media gets the hand into this type of data that is attractive, it's interesting for people, then of course through the media and through the politics as well, and politicians, things change the shape.
But then local standardized testing, that's a big question right now everywhere. It seems that a formative assessment is what is being considered more so, and there's a lot of conversation that we should do away altogether with state tests. So two questions here. One, do you believe is it a right direction for America just to do away with them completely? And the other, what kind of formative assessments are there that will allow states to understand where their schools are?
Well, my simple answer to your question, Arina, is that I think that America is doing too much testing, and much of this testing is not very high quality. I think that's the real problem there, is that many of these tests that the teachers and schools are asked to use are not really measuring the real learning that they try to do. That it's a routine, kind of a mechanist thing. I think doing away everything completely is really a good idea. I think there's a room for assessment and data and testing for sure, but I think America could consider doing what many of the other countries, like Finland, for example, has done for a long time, is to, instead of using what we call the census-based standardized tests, meaning that we are testing and measuring all the children all the time, that we are using sample-based assessments where we are taking some random samples of schools and students and then testing them when the stakes, for example, for the schools and teachers and students would disappear, and the data would still be equally reliable in terms of informing policymakers how well the system is doing. So I think in brief, one could conclude that the American system of assessment, student assessment, is a fairly old-fashioned in a way, and it's a very expensive, and as I said, that the quality is often questionable. So I think with the knowledge and the skills of that part of science here in America, I think it would be fairly easy to create and design a kind of a 21st century student assessment system that would be more aligned and compatible with the expectations of learning of young people here.
Of course, from the system point of view, American system of education has a unique player that many other countries don't, and this is a board of education. And because of this, consequently, lots of decisions are made by people who are not education experts. Communities vary in the United States, and that means that the school system needs to reflect the mindset of the community. This community might or might not be savvy enough to make the right educational decisions. So how can equity of opportunities or equity in general be reached?
First of all, it depends on how we define equity in the first place. But if we think about equity as something that will examine the link between the family background and the student's performance learning in the school, then I think this country, certainly with the structure that you mentioned, needs some type of oversight or central policy instrument that will guarantee and steer the equity. And you're absolutely right that if you have a more affluent community here in the United States, through the Board of Education and through the funding system that channels property taxes to education in the communities, it will actually work against all the efforts to make education more equitable. I often say here, people, that the funding system in most parts of the United States is funding inequity and inequality because of the way it works. How much this is a question of the actual school board, and how much this is the question of taxation and how the public education system is funded is another thing. But whatever it is, I'm absolutely sure, and this is I can say this based on the international experience, not only from Finland but many other countries, like Canada, for example, where the system is very different. They also have school boards, but Canada is one of the most equitable education systems in the world. It's through the funding, the way we fund our schools, that equity is built. No other policy can really do the same, have the same effect than having a way of funding that is socially just, that is making sure that the schools and also communities who need more resources to have smaller class sizes, have more resources, have additional stuff in the schools and so on, that they have the resources with them. Without that, I think even the conversation about the school boards and their role in education becomes irrelevant. I think it's very important that the school boards here in the United States fully understand this question of equity, and that they would also understand how the situation is in other countries around the world.
Well, our lawmakers seems often to confuse causation with correlation, and the best example comes with poverty. So when a school falls behind, is it because of inept teachers? Is it because of poor educational decision? Or is it because of poverty? And what do you believe, how do you believe, I guess, the state can determine what kind of help a school needs?
I think the best people to answer this question are the teachers and people who are in the school. And this is exactly what we do in Finland and many other countries, is that we rely and trust much more the voice and opinion of educators, those people who are dealing and working with the children every day. I don't think that there's no better person to decide what should be done with the children who need help, who need additional support, than the children's teachers and their parents together. I don't think that the politicians or bureaucrats outside of the school system can never ever come to the as accurate solution or answer to the question what is needed to help everybody to learn than the teachers and parents and the community. So I think this country also should rely more on the expertise and professionalism of its teachers and principals in schools.
It also seems to me that right now in education, everybody's trying to fix it. So fix that, do away with this, take this, so change curriculum, improve teacher training, and so on and so on. But it seems to be very fragmented measures. It seems pretty obvious that learner is in the center of a learning experience, and it's influenced by factors outside of what schools can really control. So from your perspective, what would be the indicator of a quality education system, if we're talking about quality? Not the best, but quality.
Yeah, again, I think quality is equally complex concept than equity is, and it's used in a many different ways. For some people, quality simply means the test scores and academic achievement. I think the concept of quality of education system is also changing during the course of the time. It's not so long ago when we had a time when quality of an education system simply meant that how many students are able to pass the system, graduate, and how many of them reach the certain level of knowledge in different subjects. But I don't think that we are thinking about that much anymore when we think about quality. If you ask my opinion, I think that I think that we are moving towards that direction in the quality of education system question, that the quality should be determined by simply looking at how many of our young people realize, because of education, because of the fact that they go to school, that they have a talent, that they have something within them that the school and themselves they can cultivate and improve and enhance to make difference in their own lives and lives of others.
So in a way, self-confidence.
It's partly self-confidence, but it's also part of the kind of a self-awareness, the ability to discover your inner talents. And that's what I see, like Sir Ken Robinson, for example, a good friend of mine, who is often speaking about the human resources crisis. And the human resources crisis that we have right now is equally important and serious as the natural resources crisis. Means that we allow so many young people to go through the education system in Finland and here in America, everywhere, without ever realizing that they have something within them, that they have this talent and passion and power within them that they could use for their own lives and lives of others. And so the quality of education system for me right now and in the future should be measured partly, not entirely, but partly by trying to see the extent to which the system of education is able to help everybody to discover this talent, and also, create this kind of a real interest in learning more, educate themselves further. If you look at typical young people in America or in Finland as well, and many other countries right now, many of them, unfortunately, they leave the school system, they leave the high school with this kind of thinking that never back to school anymore, no more books, no more learning, because it's boring, it's useless, and it's not helpful for me at all. And if we are doing this, I think we have a serious problem, and that's why I'm so passionately speaking about this Ken Robinson's idea of finding your own talent as a main indicator of the quality of education system.
You're right to the point, because mostly if you ask kids about schools, it's almost become a cliche that, school is not good, it's boring, it's not interesting, I'm doing it because I have to.
Yeah, and exactly, and there are many people, I see it in higher education institutions here and in other places and in schools, that there are young people who are there not because they want to learn things, because they want to understand things, but because they want to have a degree. They think that I need this formal qualification to get to the next level. And
something tangible.
Yes, and sometimes it's okay, but it's not a sustainable way of thinking about the quality of education system or improvement of education. I think we should have everybody in our schools and universities, because these people really want to learn the things and they're interested and curious about learning something new, and this is not the situation right now.
Well, thank you very much for a very insightful conversation today.
Thanks, Arena. Thank you.
While important, higher academic test scores are only a partial indicator of the quality of an education system. Successful schools set high expectations for all students, regardless of their backgrounds, and wisely use their resources. They don't accept "that's how I am" attitude, but help children grow to be the best they can be. Most importantly, instead of fragmented measures, successful schools seek the whole system improvement, setting high standards for academic excellence and working to create a powerful learning ecosystem that supports equity of education.